Content warning. This podcast discusses violence, murder, suicide, civil unrest, aggressive policing, racism, and lynching. If you or anyone you know is considering suicide or self-harm, or just need to talk about problems, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255 or text the crisis text line at 741-741. Previously, on After the Uprising.
If this happened to your child, wouldn't you want to get down to the bottom of this and find out what really happened?
So I think he really wanted the love from his mom, but it was just kind of hard sometimes. Danye, he did have a hard head. He was hard-headed.
Phones that have a Qualcomm chipset usually give me an option to bypass the passcode, but I never have luck with them. I'm not too hopeful on it.
Someone's trying to hang you. You're going to fight. You're going to end up with some type of scars or bruises somewhere. That man had nothing.
I mean, this is speculation, but do you think Danye would do something so far as, like, try to arrange to get Marcel hurt?
Danye would do it himself.
We went into his YouTube searches, and then there's a search for a very specific phrase, which is how to tie a hangman's noose with a blanket.
Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Don't shoot!
What you're looking at is the aftermath of the grand jury deciding not to indict Officer Wilson.
A young man found hanging from a tree in October. His mom believes someone murdered her son, targeting him.
Danye became an activist in the wake of the shooting death of Michael Brown by a white police officer.
That's why Melissa McInnes wants St. Louis County Police to dig deeper into her son's death.
He was not suicidal.
This is After the Uprising, the death of Danye Dion Jones.
If I really felt like that's what my son wanted to do, I would let it go, because I can move on. I can start breathing, you know. And my children will tell you this all the time, but we are against the whole suicide thing. I'm not judging anybody, but we've always been against suicide, you know, because I have a friend whose son had committed suicide. We sat down and talked about it, and Danye and Javon always said, you know, you ain't got to worry about me going out that way, he said. And I don't really want people to look at him as, you know, as being judgmental, but he said, you know, that's weak. That's weak as hell. Leaving people behind, you just give up and you kill yourself, and you're going to hell. You know, that's how we looked at suicide. But honestly, if that's what my baby wanted, and somehow he wasn't getting peace, or if I felt like he was depressed and he just couldn't make it, you know, something huge happened, I would understand that. And I would be like, you know what, that's what he wanted, and God bless him, or, you know, spare his soul, you know, but I would be able to move on. I would start my grieving process. That's not it. I'm positive. We are positive. Danye wasn't even on any of that. None of it. So now we have to fight for him.
That was a clip from our very first long phone chat with Melissa, back when she still used the burner phone we sent her to talk to us. She was insistent at the time that if she believed Danye had died by suicide, she could begin to grieve and eventually move on with her life. She would express this sentiment to us many times over the next 2 years, and we tried to always make good on our original commitment to give her the benefit of the doubt in accepting the possibility that Danye was the victim of a homicide. And insofar as this podcast is concerned, we have spent now 8 episodes doing just that. But in this episode, we would like to take a beat to look at suicide, particularly as it pertains to Black Americans. I could just start by just having you state your name and your profession.
I'm Sherry Davis Moloch. It's like 3 words, no hyphen. I'm in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at George Washington University. I'm an associate professor there.
Professor Moloch has written extensively about suicide amongst young Black people. One of her papers that we read talked about stigmas surrounding suicide.
For many years, no one was really doing research on Black suicides, and in part because of the myth that Black people don't complete suicide. So the other problem was that up until the 1980s, most of the national data, the organizations that collect data nationally, were not delineated or categorized by race. So when people say Black people never did this, I'm like, we don't actually know that, because at that time the data was not really clearly delineated by race. It was usually whites and non-whites were grouped together. So what groups under non-whites was doing or not doing in terms of suicide rates, it was hard to make a difference with that or to figure that out. And I think that, unfortunately, because there's a long history in this country of Black people, particularly Black men, being lynched, that it's understandable that if someone finds a loved one, particularly in the public space, and they're hanging, that the immediate conclusion that many families might draw is that their loved one has been lynched, as opposed to that they may have taken their own life. And again, sometimes it's hard to clearly delineate whether or not a hanging is an accident or a lynching. For medical examiners, it's hard sometimes to make those differentiations. It depends on the evidence that's there. But having said that, if you are from a cultural group that you believe does not complete suicide, or you believe that it's something that white people do and Black people don't do, then when you have these kinds of unfortunate events, it's easier to not believe that it's a suicide. It's also just hard and challenging because I think as a parent, I know that no one wants to believe that their child took his or her own life, because as parents, we feel responsible for our children. We feel like we should be able to help them, and that we should have known this was coming. Sometimes there are no clear-cut warning signs.
Like, what would be some of those signs? I mean, because I think people have this idea that, you know, if someone's going to take their own life, that leading up to that, there's like a huge personality switch, or, you know, we hear things like, oh, they started giving away their possessions, or, you know, like, I think...
So some people do that, but some people have more subtle changes in their behavior. Sometimes people have been struggling with depressive symptoms for a while, which could be, you know, sad mood for several weeks on end, feeling lethargic, not interested in interacting with friends and family members in the same way they used to, not engaging in activities that they used to find pleasurable. Sometimes and I don't know how old this person was, but in younger people, particularly teenagers, you may see more agitation and more acting out.
As far as Danye is concerned, nothing anyone ever said to us about his behavior sounded like he was acting out or angry. But there was definitely concern amongst his family members about how in his last 2 weeks of life he stopped wanting to go anywhere. Everyone who lived in the house said that he was spending a lot of time in the basement. The basement was where he was sleeping on a couch, and there was a TV down there too. It's where Danye and Derek watched that Boston Celtics game on Danye's last day alive. So it's not like the basement was a dungeon or anything. And everyone said that when they went down there, they would find him studying real estate materials. Was this self-isolation a warning sign? Was Danye removing himself from family activity because he was depressed? And if he was depressed, why not tell somebody? Or at least leave a suicide note?
I think another myth is that people, they say, well, there's no note. But most people who complete suicide don't leave a note. Suicides in younger people can also be more impulsive, and that might be one reason why you don't have as many notes there. So in younger people, they're less likely to have a really well thought out plan. And for young men in particular, hanging and from firearms are the two top methods of choices for completing suicide. And those two methods, firearms and hangings, are very, very highly lethal.
There's a common statement that, Black people don't hang themselves, or particularly Black people don't hang themselves from trees. So what are the rates of taking one's life through hanging by Black men?
So normally the data is not disaggregated to that degree. So when they do the data from the medical examiners or the coroner's offices, they're going to do cause of death, and for hanging, it's going to be asphyxiation. That's the cause. It's not going to delineate down to was the person hanging from a tree versus hanging in their room. I mean, there is some truth to the fact that most people, when they take their lives, do it in ways that are easily accessible. So, for example, it's easier to hang oneself in one's house, for example, in one's closet, or even from a beam in the house, just because it's easier to get to. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
Yes.
But that does not necessarily mean that people don't hang themselves from trees, because sometimes they do.
Is there anything around hanging that we can say we kind of know regarding, like, whether it's a first choice? What drives one to pick that as the method?
So the first choice for both men and women, young men and women, is firearms, because it's more likely to result in a death. The most lethal method is firearms. The second most lethal method is hanging. So when people choose one versus the other, it has all to do with access. If a person doesn't have a firearm easily accessible in their home, then they might consider hanging, because you can do it in your home, you can do it anywhere.
So basically it's what people have sort of around them.
Accessible, right, it's accessible.
Danye did not own a gun at the time of his death. He had previously, but supposedly the gun was stolen back when he lived with Deja. Professor Moloch said that people typically use what they have at their disposal that they think will be the most fatal. In episode 7, Melissa said that there was rope in their garage, and the house also had extension cords and belts. If Danye did want to die by suicide and had no access to a gun, and thus decided that hanging would be the best method, it is still hard for us to understand why he would choose to use a fitted bedsheet for the ligature. In prison, where inmates don't have access to much, a bedsheet's an understandable choice, but when a rope is readily available? And then there's the huge elephant in the room. Danye knows his mother has spent the last 4 years fighting for the dignity of Black lives. Why then would he choose a method of suicide that so closely resembles a racist lynching?
People are behaving as if people are really being logical, and that the completion or the death is clearly thought through. That's not always the case at all. So a young person could also say, I know if I go to this tree, this will end up in a fatality. They may not be making the connection with lynching. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because in that moment, we're behaving like they're thinking logically, I won't do that because this is where my parents are lynching. They're not thinking that either. They're just thinking that which way do I think I can do this, where the likelihood that I will die will be higher. And the stronger that young person's intent is, and by intent I mean that they really, really want to die, they really want this to be a fatality, the more likely they are to pick a more lethal method.
Have you seen, over the course of your research, anything in recent history that you thought was, I guess, suspicious insofar as the hanging, the apparent suicide by hanging of a young Black man?
I think that Black people in general are suspicious of that because of the history of lynching in this country. That's what I'm saying. I definitely understand why the parents would jump to that conclusion because of the history of lynching in the United States. That's a logical conclusion to reach. It's not far-fetched. It's just what I'm saying. It's not necessarily denial, because given the history of lynching in this country, is it far-fetched that their child could have died from a lynching and someone disguised it as a suicide? No, it's not. And so I think that's one of the things that's frustrating as a clinician, as a mom, and as a researcher, is that we're so easy to dismiss people's concerns without considering Black people have a different context than white people do, right? White people don't have a long history of lynching in the country, so no, that's not the conclusion they would jump to. But if you're from a minority group where the legacy of lynching still lives on even today in the 21st century, is it illogical or denial to jump to, or to wonder about, is this possibly a lynching? No, it's not.
I kind of want to stick on this because this is really the crux of our whole show, and it, about being taken seriously, and in each death being taken seriously and being properly investigated. So, right. I guess I would ask, what would you expect from local police and medical examiners when there is an event in which a black person is found hanging outdoors?
Can I say it's most likely to be a suicide than a lynching? I think statistically, yes, because statistically there are more suicides than there are lynchings, as far as I know. But would I want the police department and the medical examiners to really carefully view the scene of the incident? Yes, because I also don't want people to assume that because the person is hanging, that the automatic conclusion is it's a suicide, because in the black community that may not be true. And I also don't think it's fair to dismiss it as the family's in denial or they can't deal with the reality of what's going on, because lynching is a reality for black people. It's not something to be dismissed. Is it difficult to make these judgment calls depending on the method and what the scene looks like at the point of death? Yes, I'm acknowledging that it is difficult. It's not always clear cut. That's true.
The thing about someone who dies by suicide is that after the fact, the details of their final behaviors can often point in any direction we want them to. And anything they did that seems highly irrational is easily hand-waved away because suicide itself is not a rational act. Was Danye self-sequestering in the basement a warning sign of intense depression? Or was he just focused on his work, trying to understand the world of real estate? Would the black son of a prominent Ferguson activist really hang himself in his mother's backyard in a fashion that is reminiscent of a lynching without even leaving a note? Or is depression so all-consuming that a state of tunnel vision prevents these questions from even entering a suicidal person's mind? It's very easy to decide first what you believe happened, and then to tilt your perspective around the facts in order to paint a bullseye around that conclusion.
What would you like to do together? What do you think you connected over?
We like going to St. Charles, the St. Charles Park. That usually was a getaway spot for us. We usually went to the park, stand by the river and talk. We usually go on drives. We like to eat food. We did that a lot. We ate a lot of food.
This is Danye's best friend, Damon Moore, the one who was shot 4 times, allegedly by Marcel. He helped us understand who Danye was by telling us the kinds of things they used to do together.
My relationship with Javon was more, it was close, but we kicked it. We had more party time, went out, had parties and had fun. Me and Danye's relationship was, he influenced me in positive ways. I learned from him, older brother, a mentor, you know what I'm saying? And he looked out for me, my right-hand man. We talked about more, expressed more ideas and thoughts and exploring life and shit, goals. So our relationship was much closer. I was much closer to Danye.
How would you describe him?
I would describe him a protector. The people he cared about, he protected. He went all out, 110% for him. He was a kind person once you got to know him, and a caring person, but he was very, quiet to himself, very discreet with his actions. You had to be a very close person for him to let you in. But when he did express himself, he was a very vocal individual. He always had this positive but very, mellow energy about him. He had that type of aura. It was always positive.
This description of Danye as generally mellow and quiet yet positive was pretty much how everyone described him to us. But we figured that Damon, as Danye's best friend, might have deeper insight into Danye's psychological and emotional health.
I mean, was he a little bipolar? He could be really up and really down? Was he, ever depressed?
Not bipolar. People usually go through ups and downs. He had a few things that did bother him that we talked about and discussed. He had a few things that he was very adamant about and optimistic about as well. It really just depended on the day and occasion and what was going on in his life at that time. He kept a lot of information in. I got a lot from him, but sometimes I had to pry information out of him, check up on him. He'd check up on me. If he was going through something, he'd come by the house. We'd sit over probably, a couple Hennessy or something and just chop it up.
We asked if Damon noticed a change in Danye, if he too perceived Danye as paranoid in his last weeks alive.
There's a perception that he was paranoid in his final weeks. Do you have any idea why?
No, he wasn't paranoid. He wasn't paranoid. He was stressed out. Not paranoid, though. I mean, he always naturally watched over his back. Oh, he was always vigilant. He always paid attention, cautious. That was just one of his traits. But as far like up to like in the last few days or whatever, I know we had some talks. From what I perceived, from me talking to certain people, he was stressed, but I didn't think that it was as deep as it was. I mean, it ran across my mind, and then after everything that transpired, I thought about the conversations we had and everything like that. I know it was a lot on his mind with the rumors and with the, property and with his living situation, his car. He had told me about, he was upset about his car being broken down. So he felt like it was a lot on his plate, a lot on his shoulder at the time. And he was telling me like he was staying strong, keeping his head up, high hopes. But it was, bothering him. I mean, from what I get from it, I hear the homicide part, I feel it. But in my honest opinion, after reevaluating everything, I think it was more so on the suicidal part.
Of all the people we spoke with who were close with Danye, Damon was the first one who said that he believed it was likely that Danye died by suicide. Being Danye's best friend of many years, Damon's opinion holds a lot of weight.
I know what conversations we've had. I know how close we were. I know certain things that he disclosed to me, that he was, possibly going through it that bothered him. One of our last conversations was a lot of things on his mind. That's why, So, I mean, it was very likely.
So are you kind of saying, like, in the moment you didn't think of him as depressed, but like looking back and kind of adding it all up, you felt like maybe he was?
No, in the moment, I'm not gonna say I didn't feel that he was depressed. In the moment, I knew that he was stressed. I knew that he was, it was bothering him. I don't know what other word, a less stronger word than depressed. I didn't think it was as serious. I didn't think it was as far as, him killing himself. And I know he cared about Miss Melissa a lot. He had a lot of, he loved his mother dearly. I remember the first time I seen him cry, she had a gathering down in South City, and when she had gave her speech and, exposed, the severity of her condition, he was real upset. He walked outside, walked out, he went to his car, walked to his car with him. He was in there, shedding tears, but he was a very strong person, so it's a lot for him to actually cry, you know what I'm saying? So that was also on his mind. He was concerned about his mother's health and her stress. I know in his recent times he felt like he was burdened, being his age, and he felt like he was, he wasn't doing enough.
After Damon told us that Danye felt like he was a burden to his mother, which is something we had not heard before, Damon also told us that his girlfriend Claire had spoken to Danye about depression, and he arranged for all of us to meet so she could tell us what she knew.
He did say he was depressed because he felt like it wasn't going nowhere.
Do you remember when roughly that was? Could you place a month?
Tell them everything you told me.
Was it like close to
everything we talked about? Just
I am
outside of the crazy stuff, but everything that we talked about, bro.
Well, honestly, we used to talk about depression because I was depressed too, and then that's when he came out and said that he was depressed also because of everything that was going on, and basically he just felt like at that age he wasn't where he was supposed to be.
But he's always been like that, like ambitious, and then it's like if he feel like he's in a crush for too long, he'll start getting frustrated. But he won't express it that much. But you can see it.
I want to make sure I have this crystal clear on the timing. Because Danye went out to Colorado and then Idaho in 2017. And then he didn't die until later in 2018.
Yeah, this was before he went to
This is when,
Idaho.
Okay, so and then this is also the time when he expresses to you,
yeah,
I'm also depressed.
Yeah.
When he came back after going to Idaho, he came home and then started staying with his mother and with Derek. Was he still coming over a lot in that time?
Yeah, he would come to see Damon because Damon would cut his hair. But it wasn't, we didn't have any more conversations about his depression. He just asked how I was feeling.
Okay.
Without any visible wounds and with a chair turned over near the tree, it was decided that Danye died by suicide. His best friend Damon doesn't question that conclusion, but only wonders what if. What if he had gotten with Danye that day? Listening to this show and thinking about the facts of the case, we're sure that you listeners have probably wondered, how would it be possible to hang someone against their will without hurting them first? We've asked ourselves that question over and over, and so we have imagined a variety of scenarios. When imagining how someone could get the drop on Danye, the first thing people might wonder is if Danye had been drugged. The toxicology report on Danye only found metabolites of cannabis. His urine was positive for 11-hydroxy-THC and carboxy-THC. Since these metabolites can linger in the body for a long time, we called the toxicology lab to ask if they thought Danye was high when he died.
What was the person's name on this case?
The person's name was Danye Jones. The report says that there was some THC metabolites found within the urine sample, but it does not list the units. On the header page, it says result confirmed present, and then following it, there's like a space for units, but it's blank.
Hold on. Let me try to pull this case file up here and see if I can look at it and see what you're talking about. So what are you trying to do though? Like, what are you trying to figure out though? Like,
I'm trying
to get the units. What does that mean though? Like,
I wanted to know: is this something that was residual in this person's system from like a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks prior to them dying, or were they high when they died?
So, if you're a smoker, depending upon how heavy of a smoker you are, you can test positive weeks or even a couple months later, certainly. It depends on what level of a smoker you are. So it's possible that this person could have smoked 2 weeks ago.
In the case, it sort of matters if the person was using right then and there, or if it was like 2 weeks prior. So,
I can't answer that. You need to subpoena somebody to find out some real information. Unless you're part of law enforcement or something, you're probably not going to be able to get that.
It's just that because it doesn't list the quantity found.
So if it was done in the urine, does it say it was done in urine?
Yeah, it says specimen U1, which they list as the urine.
That's why. That's what I can tell you. Because the urine wasn't quantitated, it was just confirmed present.
Is there a way to know if this person was high that night, or is there no way to know that?
Okay. Certainly there is, yeah. My opinion would be no.
Would there have been something else found besides these metabolites had they been high at the moment?
They would have been a show. They would have shown up.
The toxicology report does say they looked for alcohol and found none, as well as common date rape drugs, which are benzodiazepines, called midazolam and temazepam, and found none. They don't seem to have looked for good old-fashioned chloroform, aka trichloromethane, but maybe that's because it's too old school, who knows. And then, of course, there's the YouTube search we mentioned at the end of episode 8. When going through Danye's YouTube search history, we found a search for how to tie a hangman's noose with a blanket that occurred on October 16th, Danye's last full day alive. The video it links to was posted by a user named ITS Tactical, and it's just shy of 5 minutes long. The video demonstrates how to tie a hangman's noose, but with a rope, not a blanket. Danye's YouTube history shows that the video was watched all the way through. It would be easy to see this search and try to close the book on the idea that Danye was murdered. And we admit, at first, we began to lean that way. But before we brought it to Melissa's attention, we wanted to be damn sure of what we'd found. Right from the get-go, we noted that Danye wasn't hanged with a hangman's noose. We thought, if Danye needed to watch a video on how to tie a knot to hang himself, the knot that was ultimately chosen wasn't this one. And the only other searches he ever did on knot tying were for how to tie ties. You know, like a tie you wear with a suit. So if Danye did watch this video, he didn't learn anything from it that he would end up putting to use. So we scrutinized the search history data and found that it contained something that we thought was very bizarre. Just buckle in and stay with us here. The hangman's noose search was the 27th in his list of searches, meaning there were 26 other searches that he made after the noose search. And those searches were for a lot of random things you wouldn't imagine would be on someone's mind if they were trying to learn how to hang themselves. For instance, there's a search for gap funding for real estate investors, and one for how to be your own financial advisor. There's a search for when your boss makes you work mandatory Saturdays, and even one for how to use HP OfficeJet 6600. We couldn't help but get stuck on the question, why would someone planning to take their own life in a matter of hours be looking up videos on investments, Louis Farrakhan, what life is like in Boston, how to use an OfficeJet printer? After scrutinizing these searches, another oddity came to light. For the 26 searches that come after the Hangman's News search, none of the corresponding videos were actually watched. In fact, every search done after the Hangman's News search actually corresponded to a video that Danye watched in the days and weeks before the 16th. So for instance, there's a search for Kendrick Lamar, Heart Part 4, which Danye actually watched on the 7th, so 11 days prior. There's a search for what info does a private lender need, which was actually something he watched on October 12th, so 4 days prior. That weird OfficeJet printer search? He watched that video on September 29th, so more than 2 weeks prior. And again, none of these 26 searches are for videos that Danye would actually watch on the 16th after the Hangman's News search. Why would Danye do this? Make these 26 searches after the Hangman's News search, but not watch any of the videos? What does it all mean? It looks as though, perhaps, there was intent to push the search for the Hangman's News video down the search queue. It's not pushed so far as to be gone entirely, but it's pushed far enough down the stack so it isn't immediately visible when one taps the search bar to begin a new search. This could easily be accomplished by randomly tapping old searches in the search history over and over again, without actually watching any of the content that they link to, until the desired search is pushed to the bottom of the pile. Why would he push his Hangman's News search far down the queue? If he was trying to hide it from others, he could have used this same technique and pushed it all the way out so it could never be found. He also could open his Google history and delete the search and the viewing of the video entirely. And we have to ask, who would he have been hiding it from? No one in his household had his phone passcode. If he planned on dying by suicide that night, only hours later, the intent would readily be clear by morning. The placement of the Hangman's News search beneath 26 other searches that he had originally made in the days and weeks prior looked to us like a pattern of activity aimed at concealment. Yes, it could have been Danye who aimed to conceal the fact that he made this search. But it would be odd that he wouldn't conceal it entirely or delete it if he was in fact so afraid of somebody finding it. Then, there is the timing of the search. It happened at 7:53 p.m., and the corresponding video was watched at 7:54 p.m. This is exactly when Danye would have been on the couch, in the basement, watching the Boston Celtics season opener next to his stepfather Derek.
By the time I got downstairs, he already had the game on. So I sat down and we were going back and forth, shooting shit like guys do, I'm a Lakers man, so, they put us almost in opposition of each other. So that's what made the game so good, because he's a Celtics fan and I'm a Lakers fan. When I came down there, he has his paperwork out, he's doing his research, but he's also watching the game at the same time. So it's kind of like, he's kind of back and forth with it. And then once we really got into the game, we kind of just settled in and watched the game with it.
Did you get up at any point, like from the time that you went down there until you left for work? Do you think you probably left the basement once or twice, or did you stay down there the whole time?
I can't really recall. I don't think I left the basement at all when I went down there. Because we have cold drinks in the refrigerator, so I didn't have to go upstairs or grab nothing,
What about, what would you have done during halftime? You think get up, stretch your legs, or probably just stayed down there and hung out with them, or what?
I never went upstairs. I really don't think I went upstairs at all during that time.
Do you recall him watching anything on the phone? Like, would he have been watching the game and then, watching a video on his phone? Do you recall anything like that?
If he did, I really can't recall if he did or not. But I know he was writing down some stuff. He was doing some writing.
How would you describe the mood?
Just routinish, It was just a regular night for us at home. And then we talked about Gordon Hayward coming back. He had a bad, he had an injury or whatever. Just basketball stuff, just sports talk. I was giving him the business about the Lakers. I said, they probably read, beat, Philly or whatever. They ain't gonna beat the Lakers, And, we was laughing about that or whatever. And then I told him, I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and go to work, I'll see y'all tomorrow. when I get in. And he was like, all right, you know, I was getting out of work or whatever. And I went on upstairs and went to kiss my wife before I go to work, and I was on out of there.
The order of the search history, plus the timing of the search, made us again consider, maybe, there was more here than meets the eye. We told all of this to Melissa. And also the time for it was at 7:54 p.m., which is when he was watching basketball with Derek.
Right.
So
Right.
that could mean a lot of things. Someone could say, you know, perhaps he did it when Derek got up to go to the bathroom, or, you know, it was halftime and Derek went to get a snack and Danye quickly did that. So it's not proof, but it's interesting.
That just don't make sense.
The timing is pretty odd. It would seem sort of strange to just jump right out of nowhere in the middle of this basketball game, to quickly do that and then go right back to living life, you know.
Right.
There was one other detail that we found. The Hangman's News search wasn't made from an Android. It was made from an Apple device. So it wasn't made from the Android. Now, I do know that Danye also had an iPhone.
Well, you know what? I know he was using that Android phone mostly during that time. I want to talk to Derek about, I mean, his mood that night was nothing like of a mood where we would be concerned about anything. You know, he was excited, he was acting silly, laughing about this game, but that just don't sound right.
According to the police report, Detective Matthew King, who was working alongside Detective Anderer the morning Danye died, checked both of Danye's phones. One, he said, was passcode protected, so he couldn't access it. The other, he wrote, was either broken or it had a dead battery.
He had just lost his charger, so he would come and ask me, can you use mine? And sometimes I would be like, dang, Danye, I'm using mine. And I really don't. I don't remember if he used it that day. I really don't think he did. I know I had it that night because I was in the spare bedroom, so I had it at that time when everything happened. It was upstairs.
Melissa couldn't remember the last time Danye borrowed her iPhone charger, but she believes the evening that he died, she had it with her as she watched TV upstairs. Since Detective King found an iPhone with no charge the next morning, there is a chance at least that Danye's iPhone was not charged on the evening of the 16th. We just can't say for certain. Now, the most interesting thing, and this is what concerns me the most, is that I went back in and I was trying to look at his history again and go through it, and some of that history seems to have been deleted since we looked at it the first time. There is stuff that we saw for October 17th, the viewing of about 6 music videos on YouTube. But when I went back to look at those, they're gone. When we first went through Danye's YouTube history and saw that 6 music videos were watched on October 17th, we assumed they were watched by Danye in the early morning hours before he died. So after midnight, but before 4 a.m. When we revisited his data a few weeks later, any trace of activity for the 17th was gone. We documented it the first time. We took photographs of it, so we have photographs of it being there. And I can't say this for certain, but it makes me wonder, is someone still logged into his account somewhere, perhaps?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
Yeah, so, and there's other weird things. There's a lot of little weird things that, like, quite frankly, I'm not an expert and I can't explain. If someone has his password and is still logging into it, or perhaps, there's maybe a device, like someone else's phone that he logged into a long time ago, and then it's like one of those things where the password's saved and they can just switch back in. I don't know. I really don't. But my feeling is just that Google is this huge company. YouTube is a huge company. They're, billion-dollar industry, and they make their money tracking data, selling data and keeping track of everything. So I don't think things just go missing by themselves. And again, I don't want to oversell this, but there's a possibility, and maybe it's remote, maybe it's slim, but that if we can get to subpoena Google, we can see exactly who is logged in, making those searches, possibly deleting history, possibly reorganizing history. Because if somebody is doing that...
I got chills.
I know, I got chills too.
When we were thinking about this, we remembered a piece of a conversation we once had with Derek and Melissa.
Like I said, I had saw him. He was into his tablet thing, looking he was looking at low on YouTube. That's what it was.
Did you say on a tablet?
I think it was a tablet.
Is there a tablet to be looked at? Is that something we could also...
You remember where that tablet was? It was downstairs at the other house.
No.
It was a tablet that was
It could have
downstairs.
been a borrowed tablet or something, because I do remember seeing them working on a tablet.
Mm-hmm.
And it could have been a borrowed tablet or some friend, somebody could let me, because I don't recall seeing it, before.
Anymore.
Or anymore after that.
YouTube's search history is not device-specific. It's account-specific. So if you log into your Google account on a tablet and make searches, and then go to your YouTube history on your phone, the searches will still be visible. If it's true that Danye borrowed a tablet from somebody and had logged into YouTube on it and then returned the tablet before logging out, whoever had that tablet could make searches and delete activity, and we would find that going through his history on his phone.
It could be a door that blows wide open and is great and helps answer all the questions. It could also be something that gets an answer and it's not what we expected, and we go, oh, okay, and it's not, so I just want to make sure, I don't want to get your hopes way up.
Right.
But I think we need to pursue it, and the problem is the only ones who can pursue it are people who have legal subpoena power.
Right. Okay. All right.
It's hard not to see this YouTube search as a piece of critical evidence, a digital fingerprint belonging to either Danye himself or to a conspirator in his murder. But as it stands, we have no way of pinning down exactly which device from which Wi-Fi router was used to make the search. We also have no way of opening Danye's iPhone. We needed someone with subpoena power. Plus, there were other questions. If Danye was actually murdered, the planning and execution of the act would seem to require the murderers have a lot of not only skill and ability to hide their deeds, but also inside knowledge about Danye's life and the layout of his home. How would all of this be possible? Is it possible? Or does even considering Danye's death a homicide at this point stretch the imagination farther than it rationally wants to bend? That's next time on After the Uprising. After the Uprising is directed, produced, investigated, written, and reported by myself, Reno Vishelski, and John Duffy. John Duffy was also the editor. Dave Cassidy was producer. Sound engineering, design, and mix by Josh Condon. Executive producers were Matt McDonough and Tina Exeros for Now This, Brett Kushner for Group 9 Media, and Jess Borave was executive in charge of production. Jonathan Hartwig and Bradley Rayford were consulting producers. Eliza Craig was assistant producer and did additional reporting. Mallory Kenoy was a writer's assistant. Kristen McVicker and Taya Wilson were production assistants, and Haley Klesmer was a post-production assistant. Fact-checking by Allison Humes. Theme song and other music by Zachary Walter. Legal by Keith Sklar and Peter Yazzie. Special thanks to Ann Frado, Danny Gonzalez, Barbara Koppel, Alex Lester, Beth Ann Macaluso, Emily Marinoff, Ruth Vaca, and the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. After the Uprising is a production of Double Asterisk, iHeartMedia, and Now This in association with True Stories. You can find us on Twitter and Facebook. If you have useful information about the death of Danye Jones or anything we've covered, please leave a message on our tip line at 347-674-7401.